The moment Michael stepped off the late-night bus into the thin winter light of a Midwestern city, he felt the weight of years pressed down on his chest like a held breath that never found release. The streets were quieter than he remembered, or maybe silence just sounded louder when you came back with pockets full of money and hands empty of warmth. Somewhere between the glowing storefronts and the cracked sidewalks, he wondered if you would recognize the man you had become if you ever dared to look him straight in the mirror, and whether you would make the same choice again knowing what it costs. Years earlier, love had lived in small places for him and Sarah, in a rented apartment near the Ohio River where the heater rattled and the windows leaked cold, but laughter filled the gaps. They were young and broke, measuring wealth in shared dinners and whispered prayers before sleep, believing that patience could outlast poverty. When the offer came for Michael to chase a high-paying future in California, it arrived dressed as salvation, a promise that sacrifice now would buy happiness later. If this were you, standing at the edge of a dream that glittered with certainty while love asked for faith, which voice would you follow? The one that promised security or the one that asked you to stay? Michael told himself he was choosing for both of them. That money would erase their worries and finally make him worthy of the life he wanted to give Sarah. But weeks turned into months, and the distance hardened into a habit of absence. Sarah stayed behind in Kentucky, working long shifts at a clinic, sending letters that grew thinner with hope as his replies filled with updates about promotions and penthouses and the relentless climb. He learned quickly how to speak the language of success, yet forgot how to listen to the quiet ache of someone waiting. And with each milestone he reached, something unseen slipped further out of reach. In California, Michael's world expanded with glass offices and endless highways, and his bank account swelled until numbers lost meaning. He bought a house with rooms he rarely entered and a car that hummed with power, but at night the silence followed him, stretching long and cold. He told himself this loneliness was temporary, that love could be paused and resumed like a saved file, but the truth settled in slow and unforgiving. Sarah's letters stopped arriving, and though he noticed, he never asked why, because asking would mean admitting that something precious might already be gone. Back in Kentucky, Sarah carried on, each day an exercise in quiet endurance. She paid the bills, watered the plants they once picked together, and learned how to sleep alone without letting bitterness take root. When the doctor found the shadow on her lungs, she faced it with the same quiet courage she had practiced for years, trusting God more than outcomes. Michael did not know about the hospital rooms or the nights when breathing hurt, or how Sarah still prayed for him, not for his return, but for his peace. Time has a way of teaching lessons when people refuse to learn them gently. Michael's career peaked with headlines and bonuses, but the applause felt hollow, echoing against walls that knew nothing of love. When a mutual friend called one autumn evening, the words were simple and devastating, telling him that Sarah was gone and that the funeral had already passed. In that moment, wealth showed its true weight, heavy and useless, unable to buy back a single hour or soften the blow of regret. The journey back east felt longer than any flight he had taken for business, each mile a reminder of how far he had drifted from what mattered. He returned to a town that remembered him better than he remembered himself, where neighbors offered quiet nods instead of questions. Sarah's sister Hannah met him with eyes that carried both grief and restraint, handing him a small box of letters Sarah had written but never sent, each one dated, each one filled with hope that he might come back before it was too late. Michael sat alone in the old apartment, now empty, reading those letters as dawn broke through the thin curtains. Sarah wrote about missing him, about faith and forgiveness, about believing that love was not measured by distance, but by devotion. She never accused him, never begged, only trusted that if love was real, it would find its way home. With every page, Michael felt something inside him fracture, the realization that he had been rich in all the wrong ways. Days later, he visited the small cemetery on a hill overlooking the river they once walked beside. The wind moved gently through the trees, and Michael finally allowed himself to cry, not the quiet tears of embarrassment, but the raw, shaking grief of a man who understood too late. He knelt there, offering apologies that no longer had an audience, asking forgiveness from a God he had ignored while chasing his own plans. In that stillness, he felt the faintest sense that love does not end with death, that some lessons are meant to change the living. Michael stayed in Kentucky, selling the house in California and funding a scholarship in Sarah's name for nursing students who struggled like they once had. He volunteered at the clinic where she worked, finding purpose in service rather than status, learning slowly how to live with humility. The change did not erase his regret, but it reshaped it into something that could honor her memory, a reminder that wealth without love is a hollow victory. If you have ever stood at a crossroads where ambition pulled one way and love the other, let Michael's story sit with you for a moment. Life rarely announces which choices are final, and the things we postpone are often the things we lose. Before this story ends, take a second to share in the comments what you would have chosen, love or wealth, and why. Michael still visits the hill by the river, not to mourn, but to remember that the greatest riches he ever knew were found in a small apartment filled with faith and laughter. And if this story touched your heart even a little, consider liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing, so more people can be reminded that love, once lost, is worth more than all the wealth in the world.